Ukraine might have sunk another ship, a submarine in Sevastopol. At the same time, the situation in the Avdiivka area remains critical and is probably even getting worse at the moment. We'll talk about this as well as about troop generations, politics, the prisoner exchange, and the detailed changes along the front line in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Hello and welcome. The Russians have been struck in Morozovsk. Yes, the airfield has been struck again by Ukrainian drones. As you can see, fires and explosions are visible in the background after the Ukrainian drones have hit something. The satellite pictures indicate that the ammunition storage on the airfield has probably been destroyed, as you can see here in this change here, the change in the looks of on the airfield. Also, an oil depot in Rostov, the Atlas oil depot in Rostov, was also hit. Fire started there. The exact damage is unclear. While in Kuban, two electric substations have been hit, causing power outages in Russia. The Russians strike back with drones and cruise missiles, even though none of the attacks were significant enough that we need to dive into them in detail. On the northern front, we have pictures that have appeared in Chernihiv of 5 dead Russian soldiers. It's said that they were a sabotage group that infiltrated and were caught by the Ukrainians and eliminated. More details, the exact details are unknown at this point. It is confirmed though from Russian military bloggers, so it seems to have actually happened that the Russians somewhere infiltrated in this area. Further east, we have reported fighting at Lyboke and at Vovchansk, but in both cases I cannot see any change in territory, so we switch over right to the Eastern Front. Here the Ukrainians had a minor success close to Raihorodka. Here we have a geolocation of the Ukrainians reaching that tree line here, and it is visible at this point here, so the Ukrainians have advanced up to, let me just put it here, at this point probably is the current front line, so they managed to push back the Russians by a few hundred meters. Again, it was the 3rd Assault Brigade that did the deed there, that had that success. A little bit further south, south of Novoye Horivka and west of Kamazinivka, here the Russians have advanced to this point here. We have them at this point geolocated once again. Here we see, very easy to see as it's exactly on the oblast border, so the Russians have reached that point. There are also reported attacks by the Russians on the ground lines of communication with cruise missiles. They have struck bridges over the Oskil, but overall the front line in north of the Seversky Donetsk has not changed. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have reports of the Russians advancing in Chasiv Yar. I have no report about the area here, but the Russians have crossed the canal in 2 points. They now have crossed over here in the south. We have a geolocation of this, and they have entered the first houses in the on the western side of the canal in Chasiv Yar. Again, geolocation here in the first houses, and down here right beyond the road they were seen. So at this point we have them roughly here and here where they have advanced. We also have further changes in the front line at Klishivka. Here the Russians have reached a fortified position of the Ukrainians north of Klishivka. At this point here, they have now been spotted. We have a geolocation here as well. At this point, you see, even in Google Maps, you see the extensive fortification, the extensive trench work that was done in the past here, and the Russians have advanced right at the bend of the road here, further advancing in this area. Further down in the area in the direction of Toretsk, we have Russian advances continuing in Zalizny. Here we have a geolocation of the Russians reaching this part of town, this part, and this part, and this is especially important as they have crossed the whole part of Zalizny. So this was roughly here. So we have them here, here, and here. And this is especially important as they have now reached the last houses of Zalizny and can now try to push in the direction down here to cut off the Ukrainians east of it as they try to advance through New York. We are far away from a point where we would have to say the situation is critical and they are about to be cut off, but it's a situation that's currently worsening with the Russian advance at this point. We are already at New York, and here there were Russian advances. The Russians have advanced in New York. We have geolocations in this, one moment. The Russians have advanced here along the railroad up to this point and to roughly this point, as we can see on the geolocation here. I was confused because it says Novohorodsk and not New York. So the Russians have advanced from up to here, and they recently also crossed over the river at this point here, where they have also advanced further north. So the situation in New York is also moving in a bad direction. The Russians have also advanced this part here along the tree lines towards the west, an additional advance by the Russians. The town further west, the town of Timofivka, has fallen here. We have Ukrainians confirming it. Deep State, the map providers here confirm that the town has fallen. Generally, we have advances almost along in all directions along the railroad line. So over the past few days, roughly these parts here, some in the south, this has also fallen. So basically the Russians advanced in all directions here, not too far in each case, but they have advanced in almost all directions along roughly west of this line. Wherever you see it, it was closer together in the last 3 days, in the last situation report 3 days ago. The Russians have also managed to enter Shelane, which we see here. So they are now in the first houses. This is one of the bigger settlements in the area that should for the Ukrainians, obviously, where they will try to hold them back later for longer. But there the Russians have entered, and the Russian advance in this area so far is keeping up its fairly high pace compared to the war itself, even though we have to say since the fall of Avdiivka, the whole distance the Russians have traveled is still not too impressive, even though it's still moving forward. Vesele has also fallen. We have the confirmation now. Vesele is up here, and we have a geolocation that the Russians are in Vesele itself. So this is confirmed now as well. Further south, the Russians have advanced in Paraskovivka. We have it here. The geolocation here shows them up in the northern buildings. Now Paraskovivka is down here. So the Russians have reached roughly this point here, meaning that they should control probably this. They have recently entered the southeastern part of Konstantinivka, and by now we have confirmation that they also managed to reach the 0532. The road here, that was the line of communication between, wait, this was the wrong one, here. We have the geolocation that they have reached and cut off the line of communication between Konstantinivka and Vuhledar down here. This is obviously a problem for the Ukrainians that they can't use this road up here anymore for redeploying troops here, for helping with sustaining the supply. But at the same time, it's not the end of it. The Ukrainians still have the possibility to go through Vodiane, or up here there are still 2 paved roads that the Ukrainians can use to supply Vuhledar. So a withdrawal from Vuhledar is not in the books as of right now. Further west, the Russians have advanced successfully south of Mala Tokmachka. We can see that that curve here in the road, and we have it here, the curve, and it's the middle tree line down. So roughly up till here, the Russians have reached roughly this point, probably taken this whole tree line here, and thus these tree lines here, the two tree lines here, should be occupied by them fairly soon as well. The Russians keep advancing from the eastern side towards the west, probably attempting a turning maneuver, but as of now there is no urgency for the Ukrainians to withdraw in the south. I don't see it there. I have nothing new from the Dnipro, but from the Crimean Peninsula we have some reports. There was an ATACMS strike on the Crimean Peninsula. At least one ATACMS was shot down. The Russians are saying 4 of them have been shot down. We have the pictures here where you can even identify really well the submunition. You see the rim on top of it that makes it spin, so the fuse gets hot. We see the fragments here, so it apparently didn't really fall apart until hitting the ground. That's why we see all the submunition lying around. So at least one of them was shot down. The Russians are saying 4 have been shot down, but there were reports from hits. Reports about hits where an S-400 battery was operating prior to that. Firms was confirming that there have been fires in this direction, but as of now we do not have any proof that they actually destroyed parts of the S-400 battery. The Ukrainians are also claiming that they destroyed the submarine Rostov-on-Don, which is a Kilo-class submarine. Now this submarine is already known to us as it has been hit roughly a year ago with a Storm Shadow strike and was heavily damaged. This time now it was back in the water. Apparently they had closed the hull and was still in the harbor, and the Ukrainians are claiming that this time it has fully sunk inside of the harbor, and satellite images are supposedly showing us that this is the actual truth. So some movement there, don't ask me where, but some claims is that this here, for instance, here somewhere here is supposed to where it has happened, that the Rostov-on-Don was there in the past. I have quickly checked the Russian sources so far. I do not see a confirmation that it was sunk. We'll probably find out fairly soon if it was the truth or not, but as of now I do not see it as confirmed. As said, like, this satellite picture is obviously not really useful in this regard. Generally, we have some news about the overall situation, and we have Zelensky saying the reason for the Russian advance on the front are that the new brigades for the front line is not done fully. They want 14 brigades that are being prepared, and only 3 are equipped with weapons. That means that the frontline units can't be replaced, but we have to say at the same time the shortage in personnel is one of the reasons that the Russians are advancing as well, and that's Zelensky's responsibility. We talked about it in the past that it wasn't irrational to delay or to not do the mobilization, but it turns out to definitely have been a mistake. We know that Salushny demanded a mobilization of an additional 500,000 men and in fall of last year, and that was probably one of the reasons why he was dismissed afterwards. The mobilization has then been pushed back for half a year. The Ukrainians didn't get significant numbers in reinforcements, and we had reports that the Ukrainians had to use logistics and artillery personnel as infantry in the front line. Now, it's always problematic if you push in fresh personnel in a unit that's along the front line. That's clear. It's far better to have a unit being pulled out of the front line, then sent in the reinforcements, so to give it time to build cohesion while they are not fighting all the time. But at the same time, the infantry shortage for the Ukrainians on the front line was so dire that they had to use specialists as combat infantry, specialists for something else that were not specialist infantry in the trenches, thus causing significant losses. And this could have been avoided by sending troops to the front line, which it was the decision of the Ukrainian government to not do at that point. So while the situation is bad, and while we even have Mashovets saying that a breakthrough, here we have it, they will be forced, so the Ukrainians will be forced to retreat behind the Volchya River to the west, and there is no guarantee that the enemy will not be able to break through between Meshevoy and Skuchny. So he basically says he thinks there's a breakthrough possible, but the Volchna River that he's talking about is actually not that an impressive. This is this river here. So a breakthrough to the west would be obviously bad, but unless the whole front line collapses, the Ukrainians will lose territory that is dear to them, that they will want to reconquer at some point. But at the same time, most analysts agree that the Russian offensive will probably culminate in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So whether the Russians can cause a death blow is maybe hoped by some, but seems fairly unlikely. Still, though, there are problems, and there are significant problems at this point. And one of the fingers to point is obviously the lack of help over the winter from the Western allies, and at the same time, the delay of the mobilization by the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainians unfortunately have to blame themselves to a certain degree at that point, and there is no reason to sugarcoat this, no reason to deny that. The Ukrainians have made mistakes, and they currently pay dearly in lives and in territory for that. In sabotage regards, we have news that the GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence, is basically admitting that they have special forces in Mali, Sudan, and Syria. We talked about it in the past as well. This is very efficient for the Ukrainians. A handful of people can cause disproportionate damage to the Russians, and it makes perfect sense for the Ukrainians to do that. Now we have the Ukrainians increasingly basically admitting it. So while we just talked said something about the bad situation for the Ukrainians, on the Russian side, not everything is perfect either. First of all, the federal government is doubling the signing bonus for recruits to 400,000 rubles. Before it was 195. We also already talked in the past that the states themselves, the oblasts, also increased the numbers sometimes 5, 6, 7 times, up to close to 2 million rubles by now to find more volunteers. This is a clear sign of the decreasing number of volunteers the Russians can produce, that they can recruit. Then we have something interesting here. The Russians are reporting that they made a computerized visor, basically to aim the AGS-17 and the AGS-30. Those are automatic grenade launchers with explosives that are being used as short-range fire support, and now they apparently computerized it to a degree, and now it's being rolled out to help with aiming and increase accuracy. An interesting technological advancement here. Then we have a Russian opposition page that is saying that the Russians have only paid, the federal government has only paid 426,000 times the signing bonus, while the Ministry of Defense has claimed that they recruited 640,000. I tried to access the site. It was offline when I tried it. Every page that I found either didn't show saying that story, either didn't show a link, or the link led into nothing. So I wasn't even able to check it with the original claim, unfortunately, at this point. That doesn't mean it's not true. That doesn't mean it's not online. It's just that I couldn't find it to confirm it, which is unfortunate, because this is obviously a huge discrepancy when we're talking about 426 to 640,000 men. But at the same time, we need to say that on the front line, the Russians are vastly superior in numbers. We see that from the Ukrainians themselves. So whether the Russians have actually recruited less doesn't seem to change much along the front line. Also, there are some numbers that recruits that have been recruited by other military services in special volunteer units, in PMCs, etc., might not be counted in this. But at the same time, we also had the GUR just recently confirming that the Russians recruit 30,000 a month, which would fit more or less with the official numbers that the Russians are reporting. So this might be an accounting error. This might be the Russians not paying signing bonus that they promised. We had videos and more videos about the Russian soldiers claiming that they are not being paid according to contract. So this could already be the explanation. But whatever it is, while there might be 214,000 soldiers missing, They don't seem to be missing on the front line when we look at the current developments. Then now more and more pictures appear from F-16s along the front line, but by now it's clear that the F-16, I talked about it in the past, this is not going to be a complete game changer, even though some hope for it. The Ukrainian F-16 are not going to receive AIM-120D AMRAAM, the most modern version. At best, they are receiving AIM-120C8. That's a significantly shorter range and less in capability, because if the Ukrainians shoot those missiles towards the Russian planes, then they shoot them over the front line, which means while they are meant to self-destruct at some point, not all of them are going to self-destruct, and over the long run the Russians are going to capture wreckage, which will allow them to analyze them, which will allow to analyze the sensors, which will help them to find better electronic countermeasures. They will be able to identify the US electronic countermeasures, so their own ways of defeating AMRAAMs will significantly improve, and they could obviously give those details to the Chinese as well, which would give a disadvantage to the United States in a potential conflict regarding their most used air-to-air missile of an extended range. So we can't expect them to receive those. If they use C4 to C6 AMRAAM, then the range is just roughly 105 kilometers. With the C7 and C8, it's 160 kilometers, but this is under ideal circumstances. So it's against a cooperative target that flies directly in a straight line, that flies without maneuvering, and where the plane launching it is at high altitude, thus at thinner atmosphere, which means less friction, more range for the missile, and thus more potential energy for the missile as well. If the Ukrainians can't fly at 35,000 feet, at 40,000 feet while launching those missiles, if they're flying at 300 feet, barely on the ground, then the missile will have burned out very, very fast, have used a lot of its energy, even reaching an altitude of 30,000 feet, and thus the range will be laughably short in comparison to the potential numbers that we could find on Wikipedia or on some online sources. So in total, that the Ukrainians will be able to reliably shoot down the glide bombers, just the glide bombers, if they are actually launching, as some claims are, 80 kilometers from the front line, is unfortunately already questionable, as those will not be cooperative targets, and as the Ukrainians will not be able to fly at 12,000, 15,000 meters altitude close to the front line. Otherwise, they would be engaged with the long-range Russian surface-to-air missiles. So the F-16 right now, the analysis say they mostly will be used in countering drones and countering cruise missiles. In that, they will definitely help. But to imagine that a couple of them will already be a game changer is unfortunately completely unrealistic at this point. Let's talk about politics here. There has been a prisoner exchange in which Russian agents, one of them a convicted murderer of an opposition figure, were exchanged against hostages and Russian opposition figures. Germany freed a murderer of a dissident, and I think there are some claims that he was involved in a terrorist attack, so don't ask me about the details, but he was a convicted murderer in Germany serving a life sentence, and he was exchanged in the overall thing. But the opposition figures that were freed in Russia did a press conference in Germany and immediately demanded an easement of the sanctions in Russia, and claimed that sanctions should only aim at Putin and the elites, not at the regular Russian, while we talked in the past that the surveys say 70% or more than 70% of the Russians support the war in overall. So I guess some of those who made the decisions to exchange those opposition figures won't be too happy right now. Right now, we also have to conclude that every citizen of a Western nation is in imminent danger of being taken as a hostage if he enters the Russian sphere of alliances, be it Belarus, be it Russia, be it Iran, North Korea, and potentially even China. If on the airport all that's needed is some bag of drugs in his suitcase being placed there, and then he can be arrested and sentenced and be used to exchange for future spies that have been caught. Because as said, we are not having an exchange. This was not an exchange like in Cold War where spies from each side were simply exchanged. This was in part definitely simply hostages that were taken under false pretense, that were sentenced to harsh and long prison sentences to then have some negotiating, some bargaining power to gain back agents that were caught in the West. Then we have reports that Zelensky is increasingly facing domestic troubles as well. Only 48%, so almost half of the Ukrainians now see Zelensky's party in negative light. Only 13% are still supporting it. Obviously, with the long war, no new elections, and the progress of the war right now not being too rosy, there is discontent rising with it. That should not be much of a surprise. This episode, I do not have fresh reports about international support for Ukraine, but I have some picture of some support for me, so thank you to the donor who donated this cat wheel. I still have to teach them how to use it. I'm pretty sure I know who it was, because somebody donated a book, gave me a book for a present, and mentioned in his comment that I should change the cat wheel through another one, because the one I had on my wish list was not available at the same time, and almost immediately it disappeared from the wish list, so I'm pretty sure it was him, but unfortunately there was no sign in it, and I don't want to mention a wrong name without being certain. So to whoever it was, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I have to admit that my cats so far do not appreciate it, but two of them are fairly chubby and really would need the exercise, so I hope I can teach them fairly soon. Thank you so much for your support and your present. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon and leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments? And if you also want to send me something, or if you want to support the channel, which is only possible because of viewers like you, then you find the ways, the links to it in the description, where you can choose from it. And one of them is my Amazon wishlist. So thank you very much to everyone already sending me stuff. I really appreciate it. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.